if you know much about comic books, then you know that one of the most important comics, one of the most important issues there is in a string of comic books is the origin story. Now, the origin story is basically the story that tells us how the superhero or the arch enemy, the villain, came to have the powers they have, how they got the uniform or disguise that they don, their motivation for why they fight crime or why they do evil. I mean, all of those things, they're all wrapped up in the origin story. And you need to know that with comic books, the origin story isn't always the first story that's told. Sometimes it develops along the way, but sooner or later there will be the origin story. So, for instance, the origin story for a young man named Peter Parker. He's a geek, he's an amateur photojournalist, he gets bit by a radioactive spider, as will happen, and he discovers that he has superpowers, powers like a spider. And over the course of time, he becomes Spider-Man. And his motivation for fighting crime is that his uncle gets held up and gets killed. And that becomes part of his motivation, is the guilt he feels about that and those sorts of things. Okay, I'm truncating, but you get the idea. That's an origin story. Here's another origin story. There's a young fellow by the name, actually he's a baby by the name of Kal-El. Now, Kal-El, he comes from the planet Krypton, and his parents, they take and they put him in a space capsule thing, and they send him off because Krypton is about to be destroyed. And he lands here on Earth, and Jonathan and Martha Kent from Kansas, they don't have kids of their own, and so when they find this baby Kal-El, they take him to be their own, and no one ever seems to ask for a birth certificate or anything. But that's another part of the story. And he grows up, and then he discovers a fortress of solitude. Through all of this, Kal-El becomes Clark Kent, who is Superman. By the way, the S on the front, it's not actually an S, and it doesn't stand for super, okay? It's his family insignia that comes with him from Krypton, all right? He moves to the big city. He becomes a reporter, and his disguise is, when he doesn't want to be recognized as Superman, he wears glasses. So, the way it goes is that Clark Kent, Superman. You see, you didn't even know it was me when I took the glasses off, did you? Right? So that's an origin story, you know? I mean, Eric Brooks. Do any of you know Eric Brooks' story? Eric Brooks. He first appears as kind of a sideline character in Tomb of Dracula back in 1973, but then he gets his own storyline because Eric Brooks is Blade. And Blade is able to fight vampires like nobody else. Why? Because, you know, when he was in his mother's womb, she got bit by a vampire, which obviously he didn't take very kindly to. And so he fights vampires because one of them picked on his mama. So that's how Blade came to be. You see, for every one of them, there's an origin story. And sooner or later, the origin story matters. You and I, even if you don't like comic books, you know this to be true. Anytime you've ever read a biography, right? I mean, you read a biography about Martin Luther King Jr. Well, they don't start when he takes over SCLC, right? They don't start at his first pastorate. In fact, they go back sometimes to his grandparents, right? And then they walk you through to his parents, and then to his birth, and through his childhood and his education. You see, what the biographer wants to do, if he's any kind of good biographer at all, is help you get a feel for or a glimpse of what formed this little boy into the man that he became. So any good biography, as a general rule, will have a couple of chapters of origin story. Now, the reason I tell you that is because in a similar way, the Bible has a good many origin stories. You can almost go from chapter to chapter and find origin stories. But the two most important origin stories, the two that I think are the most important to us, that require a little bit of our attention tonight. Well, one of them is found in the very front of the book, and it's the origin story of humanity, how humanity came to be. You see, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the origin story goes, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. And then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day." See, it's a fascinating account. Part of what's so exciting about it, and if you've never read it before, if it's been a while since you've read that origin story, our origin story, I highly recommend it. I'd started about Genesis 1:1, and I'd go all the way through chapter 3. That's what I would do, just so you can get a good feel for the origin story and how things got to be the way they are. But one of the confusing things, obviously, about the origin story is that because it tells us how we came to be, when we read it, oftentimes we think it's about us. It's actually not about us. The fourth word clues us in. In the beginning, God. See, God, he's the subject. It just so happens that we get informed how we came to be because God created us. Now, that's one origin story that I think is really important, and I think it's worth studying over and over again, if you ask me, because you would be surprised if you stop asking the question how it happened and start asking the other questions surrounding it, like who and why and those sorts of things. You would be surprised the things that chapter 1 and chapter 2 will tell you about us and about life and how things got to be the way they are. But the second origin story, it comes from John chapter 1. And I'll read just the first 5 verses right now. "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." Now, there was this brilliant fella who wrote over 100 years ago, and just a brilliant, brilliant man who was a follower of Jesus. He loved Jesus, and I love his translation of this passage. It's just his own translation, but the fellow's name was Karl Barth, and this is how he wrote it. He said, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word. He was in the beginning with God. Everything was made by him, and without him nothing that is was made. In him was life, and this life was the light of men. And this light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not comprehended it." Now this is a cool origin story. So there's somebody named Word. And it means different back in the day than it does today when you sometimes hear really cool, hip rappers say word. Okay? So I just want to go ahead and set that out in front of you right now. But for our sake, so that we don't get confused about somebody named word, we're going to use the Greek that it was translated from, which is logos. Now you're saying, well, that ain't much less confusing than word, but just stay with me. Imagine a person named Logos, okay? Now, logos, we'll take that and we'll exchange it for word. Now check it out. Let's try the translation again. Well, let's try John 1:1-5 again. In the beginning, the Logos already existed. The Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Logos gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Now, you probably notice from that Genesis passage to the John passage, you probably noticed a few similarities, right? You picked up on them, right? Like the first similarity is they both are pretty much in the beginning. Yeah? So the writer, who's a fellow named John, but I don't want it to get all confusing for us, the writer of that second origin story, it's no accident that he starts with in the beginning, because he's wanting to connect with that original, that first origin story, right? Well, what else do you notice about in the beginning? Well, you're talking about God in the first origin story. You seem to be talking about God and Logos in that second one. In the first one, the first thing that Creator God does is he creates light. And in this second one, within the first 5 verses, you're talking about the Logos being the light. I mean, there's some pretty good commonalities there, right? But the big takeaway for me is that before all of us, before humanity, before the sun, the moon, the stars, and the mountains and the trees, Creator God existed and Logos existed too. See, this is the thing you got to get. This is tough to understand. Before us, before the world, before all of creation, God was. And you say, how could that be? Everything has a beginning. Well, everything that's finite has a beginning. Everything that's temporal has a beginning and an ending. But if you're infinite, if you're eternal, if you're not a created being, but the Creator, then you just were. Now you might say to me, I can't get my head around that. Well, I've been working on it for 35 years and I can't quite get my head around it either. But it makes more and more sense the more that time goes by, that God simply existed. In fact, the theologians, they have a really fancy word for it. They call it the aseity of God. The deity of God means the self-existence of God, meaning that unlike all of us, God needs nothing to be. We need help to be. We can't just decide on that ourselves, right? And so that's a pretty big connection there, because later on we'll find out in the original story, we find out about the Holy Spirit and and that's how we come to start to understand about the Trinity and stuff. But this is really important in understanding who the Logos is. Now press the pause button for a second, okay? I want to say, remember 2 weeks ago when we talked about John the Baptist, but I only think there was like 3 of us here. So I don't know if you guys heard that message yet or not, but we talked a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, we talked about John the Baptist, and we talked about who he was and stuff. And if you don't remember, here's the deal. There's a fella named John. He baptizes people, so he's often known as John the Baptist. It's not really difficult, right? He's also the first cousin of Jesus. He's about 6 months, no, second cousin of Jesus, my bad. Second cousin of Jesus. He's about 6 months older than Jesus. He's a prophet. His parents were up there in years when he was born, so it's pretty safe to assume that by the time he's a teenager, he is on his own. His parents didn't have any other kids, and they've probably already passed away. So he kind of raises himself, and he raises himself pretty much with God, right? And his desire is to be close to God, and he's a spokesperson for God. And so when you read in this next section in John chapter 1, starting with verse 6, it says, God sent a man, John the Baptist, to tell about the light so that everyone might believe because of his testimony. John himself was not the light. He was simply a witness to tell about the light. The one who is the true light, who gives light to everyone, was come into the world. Now, here's the thing I just want you to get. The writer of this book, he loves metaphors. He talks about water. He talks about bread. He talks about light and darkness. He loves metaphors. So this guy that he calls Logos, he just shifts gear here to say that John the Baptist calls him the light. All right? So what you have to understand he's saying is that this Logos, he's the light that expels the darkness in our world. He is the means by which we truly see. He is the means by which we truly come to understand, to know right from wrong, good from bad, everything that is life-giving versus everything that is soul-draining. That's what John the Baptist is saying about the Logos. And then verse 10 and following, it says, he, being Logos, came into the very world he created, but the world did not recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believe him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. They are reborn, not with the physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but a birth that comes from God. Now, that passage right there, I would just tell you, if you don't know anything else about having a friendship with God, you could just hang out with those 3 verses. Do you know what I mean? I mean, if you don't want to read any other part of the Bible right now, or if you want to zone out for the rest of what I'm saying, hang on to these 3 verses. You just read those out loud to yourself, just by yourself somewhere. You can go in the bathroom, okay? Doesn't matter. And just read those to yourself, because I promise you, they will change your life. What they promise is that you and me, that we can become children of God just by accepting this fella named Logos. And then here's the biggie. Are you ready? Verse 14. So the Word, the Logos, became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. Let me read that to you again. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. Well, surely by now you've figured it out that this Logos fellow we're talking about is actually Jesus, who is the Son of God. And you probably are familiar enough with it that I haven't surprised you by telling you that this is Jesus' origin story. It's not the origin story of the Son of God, because, well, he doesn't have an origin. He's not created. Remember, he's infinite. But it is the origin story of Jesus, who is God, who existed in the beginning, who everything was created through, and nothing was created that was created. So it wasn't that he got made first, okay? Jesus, who is the Logos, is God. Now that is pretty amazing. The thing that's most amazing is, and I don't know how to explain it, God becomes one of us. I don't even know why he would become one of us, other than the fact that it's just an amazing expression of his love, but he becomes one of us. God does. My daughter said to me the other day that she loves how the Message puts it. Eugene Peterson, John chapter 1, verse 14, he says that that Jesus moved into the neighborhood. He became part of our community. And then just to finish this section up, John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me.' From his abundance we've all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness." Now you heard that before, because that was mentioned in verse 14, talking about when the Logos became human, that he was filled with God's love and faithfulness. It says, "For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the unique one who is himself God is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us." So, as I said, Jesus is the Logos. Now, this origin story that I'm telling you is so important. And one of the things that really kind of kills me about it is that everyone acts as if they've heard it before. And the truth is that most of us haven't heard it before. We've only heard bits and pieces of it before. And so I want to just show you something in this origin story that I think is worthwhile, okay? Check this out. So, I need 3 volunteers. Awesome. Elijah, Tyrell, Brandon, come, my friends. Come. I'm not going to embarrass you much. Come, my brothers. Yes, you stand here. You stand here. You stand here. Actually, let's trade places, because it just is not symmetrical that way, is it? Okay, this is better. This is better. Don't you think it's better? I think it's better this way, okay? All right, so here it is. Are you ready? You are the Torah, okay? Now, Torah is a Hebrew word which means law. The Greek word is namas, okay? So Torah, law, namas. Now, the easy way to remember this is basically your Genesis chapter 1 to the end of Deuteronomy, or for some people, the law is simply a big section at the beginning of Deuteronomy. But you are basically the rules that all Jews at the time lived by, okay? Now, they made a bunch of other rules too, but you're it, man. And everyone who was related to Abraham loves you, okay? Even those who aren't considered Jews anymore, those that are considered Samaritans, they love you. You are loved by millions, okay? Got it? Yeah. Okay? Now you are Logos, which is translated word, which in Hebrew is Rhema. It's Rhema, word. Got it? So you're Logos. Now here's what's interesting about you. Not only do Jews love you, but Greeks love you too. The Greeks love you because they believe that you're the source of life. And so that's what they think Logos is. They don't think Logos is a person. They think Logos is a philosophical term, right? Now, here's the really cool part. Are you ready? The Jews love you as Logos, as Rhema, because all God did in the beginning was speak words, and things came into being. So for them, word, Rhema, is a great source of power because it comes from Creator God. So you're like kind of the best of both worlds. You got it? Okay? And then, my brother, you are not to be left out. You are really important. You are wisdom. Now, you might be thinking, well, we were reading in John and we heard about the law of Moses and we heard about the Logos, but there wasn't any mention of wisdom. Okay, but do you remember how I said that both of them start with in the beginning? Right?
Right.
So, if you want all of the players in the beginning, then before creation begins, you have to have wisdom. Now, you know that Proverbs 8 chapter that Barbara Stone and Tanya read for us before? Now, I know that most of the time you guys think that I just picked those out of the air and they have no connection with anything. But check this out, all right? Listen to this. Let me just read part of that chapter to you again, okay? Because this is very cool. Oh, by the way, sorry. I didn't get to give you your Greek words. I forgot. Okay, so wisdom, Sophia or Sophos in Greek, right? It's where we get philosophy, the love of wisdom, right? Sophos. And chachma is Hebrew, okay? Now, the only thing I know for certain is you got to make that sound when you say chachma, okay? And you got it, okay? Right? So that's wisdom. There's not going to be a test afterwards, I promise, all right? So check this out. Listen to just this part of Proverbs 8, and you'll see why not only is there the law and not only is there Logos, but there's also wisdom in this conversation. You ready? Chapter 8, verse 22. The Lord formed me. This is wisdom talking as if it's a person, right? The Lord formed me from the beginning before He created anything else. I was appointed in ages past at the very first, before the earth began. I was born before the oceans were created, before the springs bubbled forth their waters, before the mountains were formed, before the hills I was born. Before He made the earth and the fields and the first handfuls of soil, I was there when He established the heavens, when He drew the horizon on the oceans. I was there when He sets the clouds above, when He established springs deep in the earth. I was there when He set the limits of the seas so they would not spread beyond their boundaries, and when He marked off the earth's foundation. I was the architect at His side. See, I told you were there at the beginning, didn't I?
You're right.
So now part of what that tells you, part of what this tells you, and this is really important here, okay? Torah, come back. I know he did, but I'm done reading. I don't want him to, I saw Torah just edging away. And I need the law, okay? All right? So here's the beautiful thing. Even though it says in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and the first thing He creates is light in that account, what Proverbs tells us is the account does not tell us about how everything is created and when it's created. It's just telling us who did the creating. So when we read Proverbs 8, we're not finding a contradiction there. We just know that somewhere before He says, let there be light, He creates this thing. Actually, it ushers from Him. It's called wisdom. All right? Makes sense? So here's why you guys are up here for the origin story. And it's not just because people were falling asleep, and it always helps to get people to stand up. So that is part of it, okay? All right? Here's why you're up here. Basically, what the writer is saying and what John the Baptist basically was saying was that Jesus, he's the Logos, he is all of the law plus more, and he is wisdom incarnate because he was even before wisdom. He's not a created being. He is God. So what that means is when you hear about Jesus, if you're really into the law, that's great because he's the law and more. If you're really into Logos, and that being the source of life and wisdom and all of those sorts of things, guess what? It's awesome because that's Jesus, except he's more. Add to that wisdom. If that's what you're really into, in fact, you find yourself talking with someone who thinks they're really wise and that's why they're an atheist, which is really stupid, but I can't get into that right now. Guess what? That's Jesus and he's more. The origin story in these 18 verses is to say to you, think of anything of value, and guess what? Jesus is it and more.
Amen.
Thank you, guys. And it worked. You guys woke everybody up. All right, good job. So here's what I want you to get, okay? Not only does Jesus meet every requirement, every virtue, he redefines what it means to be alive and to have life. When we follow through him through the Gospel of John, he is going to teach us a new way to be human. And it's very different than the way that we have been taught throughout the years. Last thing. Best of all, the writer in John, there in that section 10 through 13 that I mentioned to you that you might want to hang out with and read. He says, if you put your faith in Jesus, you will become a child of God's. You will be accepted and you will be embraced. Here's the thing that is such a challenge for so many people when you say this to them. They have questions about other aspects of the Bible. And I want to say, great, so do I. I have a lot of questions. Let's ask some of them together. But here's the thing I need you to know when you start your life of faith. We start with where you are, not where you want to be or think you should be. Okay? So guess what? You got questions about the God of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament? That's okay. You happen to like this bloke named Jesus? Great, let's start there. Let's start where you are, not where you want to be. And let's just exercise whatever faith you have to be able to say, Lord Jesus, I believe that you are who you said you were. And I so want to believe in you, and I don't even know how. That's how you start in this family of faith, and that's how I suggest you start in your life with God. And I hope you guys think about that, okay?